Now, Dodsey is all over his football. He's all over the A-Leagues. He's a big Arsenal fan. He's worked over there in the UK for a number of years, getting some great interviews with pissed-off managers and the like. Dodsey, thanks for your time on Arvos. Just before we get into it, what is the most pissed-off individual that you've ever talked to after a game of football?
Good question. I've kind of been on the receiving end of a couple of rollickins. One was from Jurgen Klopp. That was after they got turned over by Bournemouth, I think it was, at the Vitality Stadium. I think they ended up losing 4-3 or 4-2. And
was he unhinged?
He did that thing where the mask slipped, and the big smiley German that you're so used to on these Trivago adverts at the moment. That mask slipped, and the real fiery Jurgen Klopp came out. And I asked him a couple of questions about whether or not there were two contentious penalty decisions in the game, and he does that classic thing where he turns the question back on you. Yeah. What do you think? Do you think there were penalties? And I think my line was, Jurgen, nobody cares what I think. That's why I've asked you the question.
How'd that go down?
Yeah. That was the interview got wrapped up by the press officer. Yeah, very, very quickly after that, yeah.
Good times. Now, I mentioned you're an Arsenal fan. They still lead the Premier League. However, yesterday, this happened.
Yeah, it's very tough to accept it, but the second half we didn't perform at any level in any aspect of the game at the standards that are required to win a game in the Premier League, and we paid the price.
So that was Mikel Arteta after Arsenal led 2-0 against Wolves, bottom club. Wolves come back on home soil, should be mentioned, for a 2-2 draw. Potentially cutting the lead that Arsenal have, because Manchester City have got to play a catch-up game in a few weeks' time. But it does beg the question, James, your beloved Arsenal, who haven't won a Premier League in over 20 years, is this a bottle job supreme on the way?
For the Brentford game, where they drew, was it 1-1 last midweek, I would have said no. Now, I think it is. And I have this horrible, I think I said to you on the pod maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe even before that Brentford game, that I don't enjoy watching it at the moment. I just find myself getting very anxious and really nervous, and it's just a horrible feeling, even though, when they went 2-0 up yesterday against the worst side in the Premier League this season, the worst side the Premier League has seen in quite a few years, it needs to be said. The fact that they just capitulated is not the sign of anything champion worthy about that team. And I think that's a big alarm bell for a lot of Arsenal fans. And to be honest, I don't think it's actually that much of a surprise. Whilst the result itself is a surprise, the bottom team is going to get relegated, coming back to draw what felt like a defeat, but draw with the team at the top who's challenging for a Premier League title. The way Arsenal have played in recent weeks is not good. If you take out the walkover that they had in the FA Cup against Wigan, the performances in the league have not been very good. And I don't know whether it's the manager feeling as though, too many things are coming back to haunt him about previous title races where they've also choked and not been able to get over the line, or whether it's just the fact that actually his game plan of backing a defence to see out a win rather than go for the jugular and trying to kill teams, I don't think it's working. And I think that's the problem he's got at the moment. It's just that he seems stuck between a rock and a hard place. Most people watching him think they need to let the handbrake off, and he doesn't seem like he wants to do that as a head coach.
Yeah, so if you see an Arsenal fan around the place, if you're in Australia here listening on SEN, just go up and give him a pat on the back and say, it's all right, there's only a couple of months to go. You got a couple of months left of torture to sit through.
It'll all be over soon.
Yeah. What is the atmosphere like over in England when this is happening? Because you see it in the big sports over here, in rugby league, when a team has coastline. The Bulldogs were copying it last year for this. Like they were trending in the right direction, and then something happened mid-season. The Lockie Galvin situation seems to be what everyone's leaning on. And then it didn't quite work out. Premier League footballers are so insulated from the real world because they have to be, because it's so big over there. There's not a lot of interaction between them and the fans, for instance. Even the one-on-one interviews that you get with players, you just don't get them over here. The manager takes all that responsibility. Is it internalised pressure that is the only thing that can trip a Premier League player up these days, or do they take notice of all the noise that's going on outside?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two answers to that, really. I think the first is that if you talk about the outside noise of, every single player, and I dare say even the head coach in some way or form, or at least his wife or his children will be on social media. So they will see everything. It's almost impossible to not see it. If, you only needs to click on one video or one article that, references Arsenal's draw against Brentford or the draw against Wolves. And then all of a sudden, the way the algorithms work is that you get served that sort of stuff all the time. So there's absolutely no way that the players won't be seeing that as well. I mean, some of them listen, some of them might find that quite cathartic in a certain sense. They might like to feel that's part of the way they analyze their own performances, but there's absolutely no way that you can say that they aren't kind of ingesting this sort of stuff, because it is everywhere. What football's like in England. It's by far and away. I mean, if you think if you think what AFL is like in Victoria, football is that in the entire British Isles on steroids. Every single paper, back page, sometimes front page, the sports pages are taken up by 96% football. The rest, you might get a few sports, get a couple of column inches here and there. So when there is the nature of a result like that, everybody wants to have their say on it. Everybody wants to have the hot take. Everybody wants to be the one that kind of produces the sort of the troll video now that makes people kind of, laugh at Arsenal or laugh at, whoever it was, Liverpool a few years ago when, the Steven Gerrard thing happened and he slipped over at Anfield. So there's no way they can escape it. I think the other thing that plays a massive part, though, and arguably I think plays a bigger part, is I think the atmosphere inside the stadium. The way they're playing is making people nervous.
Yeah.
And it's not like, when Ange was at Tottenham and they were playing on the halfway line and they could score 4, but they might concede 3. It's they invite pressure onto themselves, which worked in the start of the season. But now, because the fans are so desperate and they get served all of those, the things on their algorithm about Arsenal are going to choke again. They haven't won it in 20 plus years. And I think that seeps into a match day experience. Now, the Emirates has got really good and really loud over the last kind of 5-6 years, but you can just feel there's just an unease about everything there. And it would have been the same for those travelling fans in the sleet and snow and horrible rain at Molineux on a cold Wednesday night. It would have been exactly the same.
You mentioned Ange there. So overnight, the full episode with Gary Neville and his crew on The Overlap, which the program is called Stick to Football, dropped on YouTube. I had a good listen to it. It's also a podcast. You can have a listen to it as well. It's an hour and a half with Ange. It goes through his whole story. It's been well told. We know it well here in Australia. But he actually did address the Nottingham Forest situation, how he took the job at the start of this Premier League season, and in 5 minutes flat, he was sacked. And, it was a pretty frank Ange speaking to the crew.
The whole fight, that was on me, right? That was, I think you said, beware of kind of what you wish for. That was a bad decision by me to go in there. And I've got to take ownership. There's no point me blaming that I didn't get time or anything. I should never have gone in there. It was too soon after Tottenham. I was taken over at a time where, obviously I'm going to do things differently, that they were kind of used to doing things a certain way. And I've got to cop that was my mistake. It's no one else's fault but mine.
Did you have anyone saying to you, and
everyone around me
was saying that?
Yeah, but it's the first time I wasn't working in 20-odd years.
Right.
Interesting, really interesting. And Dodds, in a wider sense, that felt like, okay, the time Ange has not said a word, basically, since he got sacked by Nottingham Forest. He's done very few. I don't think he's done anything publicly. He's done some functions and talked to conferences and things, but that felt like reputation rehab and the perfect place for it, because he got to tell his story. Obviously, he said what he said about Tottenham last week, but this was about his story. And to address that with Nottingham Forest. So as a throw forward, what does that mean for his, you've seen it over there numerous times. Managers go on TV, go on radio, kind of rehab their reputation after they've been sacked. They get another job. Does this help Ange's prospects of going in the off-season, going into a Premier League club, or you still think that's unlikely? He'll have to go somewhere in Europe.
I think we touched on this a while ago when we were chatting, didn't we? I feel like the Premier League might still be a little bit too hot for him in terms of clubs looking at what happened. Now, it's actually very interesting to hear him come out and say that, because I'm sure he's still collecting his payout from Forest, which is, often why the managers don't tend to come out and slag their old employer off, because they know that they're still on a pay until they get another job, right? So
NDAs,
that's interesting that he's actually come out and
Okay, sorry, James. I've got a feeling that the Tottenham NDA might have lapsed last week, given what he said.
Well, that would have lapsed as soon as he took the Forest job. So then he was, he's straight back in, and he's okay there. So he towed the line very well there, Ange. But I just think if he has to go into a club, perfect clubs and perfect fits don't always really exist in the Premier League. Every so often it comes up. Manchester City and Pep, because of all the money, he could do whatever he wanted. Jurgen Klopp and Liverpool, another one, a perfect fit at the right time. But with Ange, I think it has to be, I don't know who his coaching staff will be if he does go into another Premier League job, because obviously, I think Milo Jedinak's now with the Socceroos, Nick Montgomery's gone to China. So there'll have to be a refresh on that. But whoever it is, he has to sit down and even say to himself with his wife and be like, what do we want to do with the kids? Because, he's got young kids who are in school in London.
Yep.
Where does he see himself? Does he see himself moving up to the north of England? Does he see himself moving to, let's say, if Unai Emery leaves Villa, does he see himself going to somewhere like Villa? But whatever he does, it has to be a place where he can be given the time to do what Ange can do, right? And it has to be, he goes in after the World Cup, or he goes in whilst the World Cup is on, if a job becomes available in the Premier League, for example. Because him, as well as anyone, he has to have the conditions around him in order to let him do what he can do.
Yeah.
And we saw with Forest, that completely was the reason why it went, belly up at the City ground, because it was just a madhouse, and he walked into a circus, and he had lions either side of him, and the circus, the ringleader was Marinakis, just saying, actually, I've had enough, fire him out of a cannon. It's just, so I think he'll learn his lesson. I actually think it would be great for him if he did go overseas and went to Germany, tried himself in a different league, different football culture. Italy, maybe, I think I mentioned before, like someone like Atalanta would be a great fit for him. Or if he went to Germany, Borussia Dortmund or something like that, teams who love his style of football.
Yeah.
Because I think that's an important thing as well. He has to go somewhere where the board have an understanding of what the fans want and what is expected of them when it comes to a style of play.
This weekend in the A-League men's, James. So tomorrow we've got New Zealand derby. We've got Melbourne derby, but wedged in the middle is UFC derby, potentially, between Brisbane Roar and Sydney FC. This is Sydney legend Ryan Grant speaking on Joel and Fletch yesterday.
It was very, very spicy, and I sort of like to get involved a little bit just for the fun of it and have a little bit of a hoo-ha, but we'll see what happens Saturday. But there's a few of the boys that sort of just looking forward to getting maybe a little bit of payback or...
Yes. Within the rules, of course.
Yeah, within the rules, exactly. And it's more, by payback, I mean winning the game and sort of getting our season back on track, I suppose, in terms of trying to rise up that ladder.
Listen to Fletcher, just getting so excited about the prospect of Argy Bargy. So this is in reference to a trial match these guys played, James, and you were across this as well with your reporting, that pre-season they played, I think they were meant to play 3:30s. In pre-season, 3:30-minute thing, and they called it off after the second 30 because it was just on. And Brisbane were trying to establish themselves as basically you can't push us around anymore because they've been diabolical the last few years, Brisbane. So they were trying to reset under new coach Michael Valkanis, and the ref just went, "This is getting way out of hand." It was like, on. So they thought, no, let's bin it here. They haven't played. Oddly, the draw is throwing up the fact that this is the first time they meet this year, but the memory's still there. What do you reckon is going to happen? Is it going to spill? Is it going to be a reset of it, or is time healed wounds?
No, I don't think so, because Brisbane won't change, and Brisbane will do what they've done all season. And all of a sudden, it's kind of worn off for them. The sort of the tricks that they were playing early in the season to get under people's skin, to really rough teams up within the law. Sure, they get bookings, and Valkanis has been sent off a couple of times. The head coach, and his son actually has been sent off. But I don't see Brisbane changing. And I think Sydney, with the run they've been on, the disappointing defeat before the game where they drew with Auckland thanks to a comical own goal in the last seconds of that game, they'll be stinging going into this game, because they're a team that were challenging at the top of the league, and now they find themselves, I think, 7 points off Newcastle. So all sorts happened in that game. There was fights in the corner. I think a goalkeeper punched someone. Ryan Grant chopped someone in half and absolutely would have been given 3 red cards if, for all accounts, I'm talking Kevin Muscat levels from what I've heard of the challenge in that game.
Yeah.
There was a a kind of a tongue-in-cheek bet between Joe Lolly and Justin Vidic, the Brisbane striker. I think essentially commenting on his ability to not score goals, and I think it was said something along the lines of, "I'll give you 10 grand if you can score 5 goals in the league this season." So they will remember all of those things, both sets of players, and to be honest, both sets of players, both teams, they desperately need to win in this game. So it does bode really well for what is sometimes a difficult time slot in the A-League as well, that 5 p.m. kickoff at Allianz Stadium. It's right, maybe if it's a 7:30 under the lights, it can be a bit more accessible if people have got things on during the day, but hopefully 5 o'clock there'll be a good crowd in there at Allianz, because it should be a pretty fiery game.
Yeah, and hopefully they got the heavy roller out after the rugby, the Super Rugby overnight on a pitch that ain't looking too good. Looks like last night's leftovers, the pitch. Anyway, James Dodd, thank you for joining us on Arvos, mate, and we'll catch up soon.
Pleasure. Good to speak to you, mate.
Thanks for watching. Now, if you want more, subscribe to this channel on YouTube or hit up SEN Football on both Instagram and or TikTok.